You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. When we were growing up, some of us didn't know what was going on. We had no idea what was going on with mom or dad or both. It was confusing. Their moods were up and down. Their attitudes were constantly different. You didn't know what to expect any given day. Sometimes it was the most amazing conversation and relationship, and they seemed so loving. Whereas sometimes they were completely dismissive or completely cold or even hostile or angry. And it was very confusing to understand which version of them that you were going to get that particular day, that particular night, or whatever the situation was. And going through that as a child is very hard because we don't understand. Nobody sits there and tells us what we're dealing with. Nobody goes, hey, by the way, this is what's going on. This is what you're dealing with. This is the situation. We just don't get that. And so as we go through it and we fuddle and muddle and do whatever we do and we walk on eggshells and we try to understand, but we try to put two and two together, but we still don't really get it. And throughout the process, we begin to morph and change to be a different person, to be the child that we feel like mom or dad wants, to try to fit in, to try to be that person, taking care of them. And it's almost like we lose our childhood in the process, which I think many of you will agree that when you were growing up, it was very challenging because it felt like your childhood wasn't existent. And the reason why it felt like it wasn't existent is just because, well, honestly, you were having to take care of your parents more than your parents were taking care of you. And if you kind of get the idea of where I'm going here, many of us had no idea that there was anything called cluster B. We had no idea what anything about borderline personality disorder was, or BPD. All these things, well, they were quite foreign to us. We didn't take a psychology class when we were 7 or 8 or 5 or 4 or 10 or 12. So we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what we were dealing with. We just knew that mom or dad was up and down and all around, and some days they were the life of the party, and others, well, not so much. And it's interesting when we get raised in an environment with a parent that has, signs and symptoms of BPD, we don't realize not only the impact that it has on our day-to-day life, which we get that. We understand that, Friday was a good day, but Saturday was a bad day. We understand that when we came home from school on Monday night, it wasn't good at all. And then we understood that Tuesday was a different story. And then on vacations, well, that was a totally different story. Mom or dad were completely different. They were totally cool and fun to be around. The exact opposite of how they normally are. Or they were the opposite. They were great to be around until you went on vacation, and then mom hid herself somewhere in the room and never came out and just sat there and read away from everybody else and didn't want to talk to anybody on vacation. So it was very extreme in the situations that took place. And the impact that it had on us in the situation was, well, we got more and more codependent. We tried to help. We tried to be there. We tried to own their emotions because we felt like, okay, if I got an A on this test, they're going to be in a lot better mood. Or if I come home and I do the dishes, well, that might actually make things better. Or maybe I don't say anything about how my day was and I stay quiet. Or maybe I just sit in my room today and work on my computer and come out briefly to grab some food and go back into my room because I don't want to have any sort of argument. And so we go through our childhood, growing up, getting into high school, doing this constantly, following this kind of, unspoken practice, really, about how to deal with things and how to mitigate life. And that becomes second nature. It becomes our first nature, and that's what we begin to live by. That's how we live our life. That's how we live our situation. And we take that into college, and we take that into our adult life, and we take that into our adult relationships, and we take that into our relationship with our significant other or partner, or even into our marriage. We take all this in there. And it's interesting how when we're raised by a parent or both parents that have BPD signs and symptoms, it's interesting how we have a tendency of meeting people that we get into relationships with that also have signs and symptoms of BPD. And it's interesting because we don't really think about it. Most of us don't put two and two together to figure out what we're dealing with. We just know, wow, this seems really familiar, or this seems very similar, or I feel, well, it just seems normal. This seems like a normal situation. I feel normal about this relationship. I feel like it's almost like I've been here before. Well, you have been there before, but you just don't put two and two together. And so in today's podcast, I want to talk about that, how it is to be raised by someone with BPD, how it is to deal with that as an adult. I mean, that's the real, situation is, what does it do to us? How does it affect us? What are the choices we make based on these situations? I mean, this is very profound stuff here because many of us are dealing with this right now. We're dealing with it right now. We're in a situation where we realize that we have surrounded ourselves, or we're in a relationship with someone that has signs and symptoms of BPD. We might be in a relationship with someone that has signs and symptoms of NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. And we're dealing with this, and we found that we are very codependent. We're trying to take care of them, owning their feelings. They come to us. They come from the victim reality. All this is against me, or I don't have this, or I don't have that, or you're not doing this for me, or you're not doing that for me. And you start owning this. Oh gosh, I got to do this. I got to take care of that. I got to do this. I got to do that. If I don't do this, they're going to be upset with me. If I don't take care of this, all hell is going to be paid. If I don't get home at a certain time, we're not going to have dinner together, or I'm going to get the silent treatment, or I'm going to get yelled at all night, or we're going to have to deal with, forever ammunition, where that one thing that I did, 2 years ago is going to be thrown in my face for the next 6 hours, and then they're going to follow me around the house and not allow me to go to sleep, and I have important meetings in the morning that I can't miss. Okay, so many of you have been there. You know what I'm talking about. Also the rage and the anger. We've seen it. If you were dealt with it, with your mom or dad, and you saw her, throw everything off the kitchen counter, or you saw her throw everything off her bathroom counter, or you saw dad do something or what have you, and you see this constant outbursts and rage, it can be very overwhelming. And then you might be in a relationship right now where you see it on a constant basis. Maybe it's a little more muted, maybe it's not as extreme, maybe it's even more extreme than what you were used to growing up. All these things are very interesting, and so the impact that it has on us is very important to know. It's very important to understand. And it really is right in our face. And so, as we think about this stuff, it's interesting. And I remember, growing up and all of us remember our some parts of our childhood, and I remember a lot of confusion. I remember a lot of confusion and not understanding things and trying to put two and two together and not understanding why there was this problem or issue and not understanding what the response was here or why the response was like that and being confused. And I remember that confusion very well. And I've had that confusion in my adult life with people I've dated and relationships I've had and friends I've had where there's a lot of confusion, and it's very similar to the confusion I had. And I put two and two together pretty quickly because of, obviously what I do for a living, but also, all the research I've done over all this lifetime and compiled. And I realized pretty much early on when I was in college what I was dealing with, And I started slowly realizing it more and more and more. And then, but I wasn't seeing it. I was blinded to seeing the impact it had as far as the people that I had in my life, the people I was bringing to me in my life, the choices I had when it came to relationships, the people I was choosing to be in relationships with, all these things I wasn't really heavily focusing on. And, when you look back at that, you're like, wow, that was right in my face. I totally picked somebody, obviously doesn't look like them, doesn't have, but I picked somebody that's very similar in nature to be in a relationship with and having lots and lots of problems with. But being in that situation and having those fights and arguments and dealing with that stuff and having that as second nature. I mean, and actually being used to it and being used to the arguments and being used to the fights and being used to this and responding back and getting triggered by it. And those triggers from childhood, right? The triggers from childhood that enter into our adult relationships. And it's not even that, it's funny. It's not funny actually, but it's wild how triggering things can be that we didn't deal with in childhood, how triggering things can be, how overwhelming those things can be, and how, you're in a relationship and it's like they're pushing all the same buttons, and it's because of those tendencies that they have, that fear of abandonment, that basically out of sight, out of mind concept too, where, it's really about them. They're constantly trying to process their own emotions and they can't really process or help with our emotions. And growing up was tough, I'm sure, because if you were having a challenging day or going through things, mom or dad probably wasn't there for you. And you probably had to put your feelings on the back burner. You probably had to put your feelings on the back burner a lot, if not always. And that's a big caveat. And that's something you've probably dealt with all your life. And in this relationship where all your feelings are on the back burner, that other person in the relationship you're in, you're constantly taking care of them, placating them, helping them deal with their stress and anxiety, helping them deal with their fear, calming them down, trying to rationalize with them, trying to placate, trying to calm them, and then you have these good moments where you're like, wow, I mean, yeah, they were in such a great mood yesterday. It was so great. We had so much fun. And then the next day you wake up and you're a jackass and you can do nothing right. And, it's a back and forth thing, and it's, I have a friend of mine that calls it like the flipping of a switch. You go from on and off, on and off. And, it is what it is. I mean, that's a good way of, talking about it to some degree. But, when we look at the situation, we are in that situation. We understand what it's like, and we're not really prepared. And because we have been in it throughout our whole life, that's what actually adds even more problems to it. And what I mean by that is, think about it. If you were not exposed to that growing up, you weren't used to that situation, that response, that attitude, that way, you wouldn't be ready for that in another relationship. If somebody came at you with that, you'd be like, what is this? What's going on here? What do you got going on here? And why am I supposed to help you? Why am I supposed to make this better? Why am I being triggered by this? So because you wouldn't be triggered by it, one. Two, you wouldn't even understand it. So if somebody's coming to you with a victim reality, telling you that you're the reason for all their problems, if this was something new for you and you weren't raised around this, you wouldn't even know how to, you probably would be like, what are you talking about? This is absolutely absurd. It wouldn't even register for you. It wouldn't trigger you at all because it would seem so absurd. So you understand, like, it'd be like being raised by full-on narcissists and then continuing to enter into relationships with narcissists. They're going to trigger you because of their problems and issues. They're going to trigger you because of what they do, because of this resonating from childhood and how much pain and suffering you had. However, if you hadn't been raised around narcissists, you wouldn't even understand why this person is acting like this, or how they even get away with this, or why do they even act like they're superior to everybody else. But yet, why is this happening? It would be so foreign to you that you would probably have to step back and let it go. It would be so foreign to you that you would step back and say, hey, I'm not interested, not getting involved with this. I'm going to move on in my life. But what happens is, because it's our norm, because we're used to it, because we've had it in our life, it seems normal to us. And so we accept this reality in our life. And by accepting this reality in our life, we continue to go through the cycle pattern of what we dealt with when we were a child. And we continue to do it over and over again, and we do it in different relationships. Many of you are married to somebody that it seemed very comfortable when you met. It's almost like you'd known each other forever. But it wasn't necessarily that you knew that person forever. It was that you've known these types of antics and these types of attitudes and these types of things. And so when we return, we'll be talking more about that, more about the impact of having a family member, mom, dad with BPD, and how that impacts you as an adult. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm talking about the impact that having a BPD mom or dad has on your adult life, and how we can be literally indoctrinated into it, becoming extremely codependent in nature, owning other people's emotions, and feeling as though all we can do is help or try to mitigate or placate situations. And as we go through life and we deal with this and we go through it, we have these challenges because we have a tendency of finding people that, well, it's just second nature, that we're doing the same thing we did growing up. We find someone else, we find a wife or a husband or a girlfriend or boyfriend to do this with, to take care of, to own their emotions, to deal with their fear of abandonment on a constant basis, the constant, the kind of the deceit, the lies, and the list goes on. And dealing with their paranoia and their secrecy and all these different things that happen, and the inconsistency of communication and the follow through and all that stuff that we saw as a child, growing up and dealing with was very challenging. And going through all this stuff was extremely challenging. And especially when you didn't know what was going on, it didn't lend itself to being easy. When you didn't know what was going on, you just had no idea what you were dealing with. You just had no idea the situation and circumstance that was coming around. And so in these situations, it's like, now that you're in, your adult situation, you're married or in a relationship or what have you, that it's challenging because now you're like thinking, how did I get into this? How did I find this? And especially the consistent, I wouldn't use the word consistent, but the up and downs of emotion, the roller coaster of emotion, the changes in mood that you get, the impulsive behavior that you're dealing with, the emotional instability, the anger, the rage, all these things, the intense sadness, the intense feeling of emptiness, all these things that go along with it. And then you're trying to mitigate it, calm it down, trying to help. If I'm just there more, that'll be helpful. If I'm just around more, if I just take care of more things, if I just placate, if I just go along with the drinking or the alcohol or the drugs or what have you, that it'll all work out, all these things, and it's very challenging because, you had this growing up and now you have it again, and it's hard to create any boundaries because, well, you didn't have any boundaries then. Why would you have boundaries now? And how do you go back and retrofit boundaries? It's really hard. I mean, you can, but it's really challenging. But the biggest thing I found is making the changes we need to make in our own life, augmenting those things that we're doing, the things that we're doing to continue on placating the situation. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we can learn to change and grow from as we grow, to realize, okay, growing up, I didn't know to have boundaries. I didn't know that I needed boundaries in my family, my parents, my mom, my dad. I didn't understand what they were dealing with. I didn't understand what I was dealing with. I didn't give myself any room to be able to have emotions. I didn't have a childhood. I wasn't given a childhood. I put my childhood on the back burner to try to help this parent, to try to help them with their emotions, and this is all very interesting because it comes full circle in the relationship you're in. It comes full circle and you're dealing with it in your current situation probably, or have dealt with it, or divorced the situation and moved on, and then trying to figure out and picking up the pieces of your own identity. If we were raised by parents with borderline tendencies, they didn't have a lot of a sense of identity. Their identity was with who they were with. So their identity was, very strong with the person they were married to or together with. So, they kind of morphed and changed based on who they felt like they needed to be to get into where, to get in to fit in. And so that can be really challenging too, because you might feel as though you didn't really know mom or dad. You didn't really have an idea of who they were. You didn't really know them, and they could have also been very extremely secretive as well. And sometimes they just didn't know, they don't really have a good gauge of who they are, and then also maybe hiding part of their life as well. So stay tuned. We're going to talk more about that, the impact of having a BPD mom or dad, how that impacts you in your adult life now. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time. You know it. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I've been talking about BPD parents and the impact they have in our adult lives, and how this can really disrupt our lives and really get us on a path of dealing with other folks with BPD signs and symptoms and feeling as though it's second nature. Oh my gosh, I feel like this is like a twin flame or a connection or what have you, a soulmate. But is it really that, or is it just familiarity of the approach on life, the ups and downs, the cycle patterns of energy, happiness to sadness, the inappropriate anger, the depression, all those types of things that go along with it. And it's interesting because it really does impact us. We allow things in our life based on what we have experienced. Like I was saying earlier, if we haven't experienced it, it's really challenging because it wouldn't be something that would come second nature. It wouldn't become something that was triggering. It wouldn't be something that seemed normal to us. Remember, it's like, if you were raised in a household that was very healthy, for example, and there wasn't this type of dynamic. If you had this dynamic in a relationship, it would kind of come so far out of left field, you wouldn't really understand how to deal with it. You wouldn't really be able to process it, and you'd be really, questioning the direction you're going. However, when we've been around it before, it seems very familiar. And, we don't realize that, the toxicity is what is familiar to us, that toxicity of dealing with it and that inconsistency. And in the process of having inconsistency, those ups and downs and those cycle patterns, when you're dealing with like a parent, they can go from loving to cold, loving to hostile, loving to dismissive. And in that process, as a child, you don't really understand what's happening. All you think is, oh, I must have done something wrong because they're treating me like this. Because I guess if I was a good kid, they would treat me okay. And so, yes, now we know looking back as an adult, wow, that was really messed up that I took that on and thought that. But also remember, that's stuff that gets ingrained into your subconscious, right? And that's stuff that lives with you until you really work it out with like somebody like me, a life coach or therapist or what have you, to really understand how to get to the nitty gritty on that. Because otherwise you take it into the next relationship and you don't even realize it. And that person is acting cold to you and you try to bend over backwards and do all these things for them and it's not enough. Maybe they start acting hostile to you and you start trying to placate or bow down or walk on eggshells. Maybe they're super dismissive with you and you're trying to get their attention and going at various levels to get their attention and it's not working and you're beating your head against the wall and trying to figure that out. So all these things are definitely situations and circumstances that are around that. And I feel like that in general is kind of the situation where when you get into a relationship and like, for example, when somebody is dismissive with you, it can be very triggering. When somebody doesn't seem to have time for you, it can be very triggering because you remember what happened when you were a child and going through childhood and the experiences you had. And it's not fun and it's very triggering. So not only is it triggering that this person is doing to you this in real time, but it's also retro going back to the past and remembering these things as well, which is also double triggering and very hard to deal with because it's hard to process all that anger and resentment and stuff that you have about the situation, not only currently, but the past situation and the impact that the past situation and the past relationship has on your current relationship. And, it's interesting because as kids, we really didn't know what we were dealing with. We had no idea. It's not like we knew that, mom or dad had this and it's cluster B and it's this type of situation and these are the symptoms and this is what you can expect. Like you didn't get like the owner's manual here to try to understand this. You were just kind of thrown into it and then you just kind of try to figure it out, right? And I think some of us, are same thing in the marriages and the relationships. You're kind of thrown into it and then you kind of just like try to figure it out. And you don't have any knowledge, you don't really understand, you're kind of just futzing through the situation, hoping that you find some sort of solution to the situation and just not knowing. And one day, you placate and it works and you try it again the next day and that doesn't work, or you try to be quiet and that doesn't work, or, you try not to respond back, but they keep following you around. They're right behind you. They're like, they won't let you go into a room by yourself. All those types of things are going on. And it seems like no matter what you're doing, none of it's ever really working. And so that can be very disheartening for people too, is like, wait, I'm doing all this stuff, but it's not working. I'm doing everything and I'm still not getting the results that I want, or I'm still not getting them to be happy or to be calm or to not cycle in and out of these patterns. And, one of the biggest things we have to realize is that we can't change them. We can't stop them from cycling in and out of patterns. No matter what we do, no matter what we say. Yes, we can be kind, we don't have to be mean, but we can't change this. We can't stop them. We don't have the power over their emotions to do that. We just don't have it. And it's unfortunate that we even think we do. And that's a problematic situation because we go through the cycle pattern like we did as a kid, thinking, okay, if I do this or I do that, or maybe I don't go out with my friends or I come home early from school or whatever I do, this will help. It doesn't help. And so we start living that throughout our adult life, even with even some friends. We probably have some friends that have BPD signs and symptoms, and you catch yourself, like only hearing from them when they need something, or only hearing from them when they're feeling as though abandonment, or they're wanting to make sure that you're still there for them. Also you might have, you might be in a situation with a relationship where somebody's very distrustful of people, very paranoid, and that's definitely a byproduct as well. And so you may be used to that, even though if you weren't used to that and you hadn't been raised in that situation, that paranoia would seem so odd and so off base. And again, these are interesting things because a lot of this stuff, especially the rage and the cycling of happiness to sadness, anger, the splitting is the biggest thing. Is like, like I was saying, my friend says it's like a light switch. I mean, the appropriate word is really splitting, but in the situation, but the splitting is just so, it's so challenging because you go from somebody that, wants to be around you, who's happy you're there, to somebody that really actually is very angry and upset with you. And it's really sad. And you start owning that, and you start owning that feeling, and you start feeling bad about the situation. You start feeling bad about them. You start feeling bad about yourself. You start really getting down on yourself and down on the relationship. And this is really, really tragic and painful to deal with. And so as we process this and go through that, it's like being able to understand that and see that. And these are the things that we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in these relationships, dealing with somebody that's super moody and having tantrums. And being childlike and accepting that kind of behavior, because honestly, if you turn it around and you flip the script, I mean, they wouldn't accept that behavior from you. They would not accept it. And so you're accepting all this bad, negative, toxic behavior in an effort to calm them down. And I think the beginning too is if you think about it, a lot of you, when you started in these relationships, we're dealing with what I call the pedestal phase, where they put you on a pedestal and you could do no wrong. And you needed that because growing up was so challenging, with your parents, and then the codependency and having somebody like really seem to see you as this amazing person. And you're like, wow, this person actually sees me and sees my value. This is like the first time ever. And guess what? Bam, here we go. And you didn't really, you kind of fell into it because it felt good and it felt great that somebody actually knew who you were or had an idea of your value, but you didn't realize this is kind of the beginning of how these relationships start. And that's what's so challenging about it, because you didn't have the pedestal phase. I mean, really, as a child, there's no way to even remember that. I mean, I'm sure when you were a kid, they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Look at our child is so amazing. Then over time, right, things change. But we're too young to really understand that. I think some of you might have memories of very young ages, but some of us don't. So, looking at this, most of us had never experienced the pedestal phase. And then you start experiencing that, and it's like, wow, this feels really good. I can't believe this. This feels really nice. I like the way I feel. I like how I feel. I like how this person's treating me, all this great stuff. And so, again, this is a very interesting place to be at. But eventually that feeling and that treatment and all that goes away. And you start wondering, wow, what happened here? What happened? You don't know that you were on a pedestal. You just thought that they really cared and loved you. You had no idea, right? Even though it was a little overboard. Okay, it was a little overboard. They were going out of their way to do things for you. It was a lot overboard. They were doing things that, quite honestly, when you step back and you really looked at it, you couldn't keep that up for a long period of time. And so that's what happens, though. And so you get into that relationship based on the pedestal, and then literally, how many months after that, eventually the pedestal thing changes and you're pulled off a pedestal because of something you did or didn't do. And in that process, you begin to see a lot of these signs and symptoms that maybe were being hidden. And then you start going, oh my gosh. And then you start getting triggered by these signs and symptoms. But the signs and symptoms seem very normal to you because you've been around it. You've experienced it growing up. All these situations seem very normal to you. And that's a big, big, big caveat of this, is that the more normal it appears, the more we really have to step back and look at the parent dynamic to understand why this appears so normal. Why does this feel so normal? Why did I walk into this situation? Aha! because of this. And I'm not saying that we want to blame our parents for all our problems. That's not what I'm saying, but we need to get some understanding and recognize what was really happening in these relationships and understand that and understand the impact. And many of you, our parents are still alive, and we're all like, oh, but they're older. Yeah, it's fine, they're older. But at the same point, stepping back and seeing some of their situations, seeing how they respond to you, seeing the issues with the communication, recognizing, the paranoia, recognizing the cycle patterns of their emotions, right? Recognizing the victim reality, seeing the codependent side of you, even now, trying to safeguard them, help them, do something for them. Even things that and a lot of things that they could do on their own, that you're doing for them because you feel like you have to, because you feel like you need to, because you've always done it. And that's really the key here. That's really the key here. And that's what's so important to recognize and understand. And so as we go through this process, we begin to see, as the other person is going through their intense anger, intense sadness, that fear of abandonment, maybe even, monkey branching a little bit, maybe, they're going for, they're in a relationship with you, but they're, in other relationships and doing things in an effort to not be abandoned, in an effort to have, let go of fear. All these things are happening, and so it's all very interesting. These disturbed patterns of thinking, the chronic loneliness that they feel, and it doesn't seem like there's anything you can do to like fill them up, and that's not your job. And that's one of the big things that's so important to recognize is you might have done that with your mom or dad, but this is not your job for other humans, and it's not your job for them. It's only your job for you is to be you and to help you and to understand your emotions and your feelings and deal with the things that you need to deal with. This is what's so very important. And we have to eventually take this into consideration and think about this and allow this to be so we can begin to operate from a position of power and understanding in our life and our relationship with ourselves and not get sucked into this situation, taking care of everybody else in our lives. And again, falling, back into the situation where we're not taking care of our emotions. We're putting our emotions on the back burner. We're not dealing with them. We're not processing them. We're not dealing with any of that. And this can be very challenging. One, two, it can hold us back from the knowledge we need. It can hold us back from that emotional connection we need with ourselves. It can hold us back from our personal growth. And all these things happen when we're not doing what we need to do for ourselves. And many of you have been doing this for your entire lifetime. This is normal for you. You're used to putting yourself on the back burner. You're used to dealing with this type of shit. You're used to dealing with this situation where it's like, okay, this is consistent. This is who I am. And you don't even realize you're doing it at all. You don't even realize what's happening. And that's even scarier because you're going through life and you're probably having a lot of stress and a lot of issues and wondering, why is this happening to me? Why does this keep happening to me? Why am I in these types of relationships? Why am I dealing with this? Why is this person being mean to me? What is happening? All these impacts and all these situations. And it's definitely important to really grasp and understand, because we can make changes to that by just beginning to have some boundaries and saying, okay, I got to sit there and realize that, one, I don't own this person's emotions. Two, I can't make them happy just because I do this and maybe it calms them down in the moment. That's just me losing my identity more and more and more and more in an effort to placate them out of some sort of, some sort of tantrum that they're going to have. And this is something I do every day. And every time we do that, we lose ourselves, right? Every time we do that, we begin to lose parts of ourselves. We lose ourselves. And just like we did as a kid, we lost ourselves. And it happens throughout our adult life. And it becomes second nature to us, which is so challenging, right? Because we don't really catch ourselves doing it. And so we have to take a step back and really analyze our choices, the things that we're choosing to do, how we're choosing to act, how we're choosing to show up. We have to realize what comes second nature, even if it's unhealthy for us, and how to begin to put an end to that. Because this is what is so important. Because if we want to have growth and we want to learn about ourselves and we want to actually manage our own life, our own emotions and our own feelings, and realize that no, we don't have to manage their emotions. No, we don't have to do that. That is not part of our job description. We do not have to do that. I mean, we're not talking about a dog or a cat here. Your pet, you need to take care of, feed, love, care, all that stuff, which is great. And you taking care of them is important, but a human being has to take care of their own. We can be nice to them, we can be kind to them, but all in all, placation and enmeshment and all those things are negative things, negative aspects of things that we've learned to do because of the past, because of the situation, because of the inconsistencies, because of the cycle patterns, because of the frustration. All these things are important to recognize and understand that we're doing it, and the negative aspect that it has on our life, the unhealthy aspect that it has on our life, and how we have to begin to get past that. Stay tuned. I have more to talk about right after this little break. We'll come right back. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. Well, I'll be back this time. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I've been talking about the impact your BPD parents have on your adult life, and all of your relationships for that matter, and how you treat yourself. All of this is very important to understand, because if we hadn't have dealt with that and grown up around that environment and with people with those types of signs and symptoms, we wouldn't be as codependent as we are. We wouldn't be owning other people's emotions. We wouldn't be doing that sort of thing, because that would be foreign to us. So if you get anything out of this particular podcast, it's to really examine how often you're owning other people's emotions, other people's feelings, taking on other people's anger, taking on their problems. How often are you doing that in your day-to-day? And this is very important to understand. How often are you doing it? How often do you find yourself in this situation? How often are you, basically taking this on? And you're probably doing it with your spouse, significant other, girlfriend, boyfriend, probably a lot of your friends around you. You might have even been doing it with some of your employees, folks that you work with. And thinking about it from that perspective and understanding, okay, wait, this becomes second nature to me because I've been around it so long. I've experienced it for so long. It was part of my growing up process as a child. And because of that, I am completely impacted by it. And because of that, it seems second nature. Because think about it, it would be so foreign. And that's what I think it's so eye-opening when you just kind of think about this and let this just kind of marinate in your brain and in your heart. If think about it from this perspective. If you hadn't been around that growing up, you wouldn't know how to, bob and weave. You wouldn't know how to walk on eggshells. You wouldn't know how to placate. You wouldn't know how to calm rage and all this. It wouldn't be second nature, and you wouldn't just do it. And that's so impactful, so important. And so look at your relationships and start gauging it. How often are you trying to take care of them? How often are you putting yourself last? How often do you feel like you're constantly doing things for them and they're not doing things for you? How often do you feel like you're having to pick up the slack, but you feel like you're doing everything for everybody? And that can not only be challenging and overwhelming and stressful, but you can get resentful from it. You may want to run and hide. You may want to escape your life because of this, because it's like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can handle this. When am I going to be able to overcome this, deal with this? And I mean, this is the real truth. This is where the rubber meets the road here, because many of you are probably dealing with this. You're probably dealing with this on a massive, massive level. You're dealing with this with a family member. You're dealing with this, obviously with a parent. You're dealing with this with a significant other. So start being aware of how you are dealing with your relationships. Start being aware of all the work you're doing for other people's emotions. Start taking awareness of how you're dealing with, the arguments at home. How often are you acquiescing? How often are you not getting what you need in your life? And the other person seems to be getting everything they need, but you seem to keep falling short. You keep coming up short. in your day-to-day life and meeting and having your needs met. And kind of looking at it from that perspective, because we all have to take control of our lives. And that also means taking control of our relationships as far as creating those healthy boundaries. Okay, I'm not going to take on this. I'm not going to do all this work for them. I'm not going to be completely enmeshed. I'm not going to, enable them to do this. I mean, some of us are even enabling people on their alcohol, drugs, what have you, all these different things. And we have to be super aware of that, because enabling doesn't help anybody grow. It doesn't help anybody. And the enabler is usually going to get yelled at or what have you, or criticized or crucified in the end, even though they were doing what the other person seemed to have want or asked for. And sometimes the best word is no because of this, or just no because this is not what I want to do, or letting this go. And so being aware that we have the right to say what we need. We have the right to be the person that we are, and we have the right to work on our needs being met and work on that and cultivating that, but also getting to understand, where are our feelings? How do I feel? What are my emotions about that? Instead of always jumping and saving and helping them, flipping the script and saying, okay, how can I help myself right now? How can I work on myself right now in this moment to feel better about my situation, to feel better about what I'm dealing with? How do I move forward in this situation and do what's right by me? For the first time, putting yourself first when it comes to emotions and dealing with those types of things, as well as caring about yourself. I hope that this podcast and information has been helpful. Please share it with your family and friends. If you haven't already, check out my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and put in Ashley Burgess or Life Coach Ashley Burgess. We have new content out throughout the week. And also you can find me on all social medias as well. So stay tuned. We have more shows coming up for you next. If there's any thoughts or comments you have on content, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact me on my website at ashleyburgess.com. Just click on that contact page and send me a message, and I'll respond ASAP. In the meantime, don't forget to live your true life and live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time, you know it. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.